Ya lo hace. Pierna derecha, directo al arco. ¡Golazo! ¡Golazo!
The world of football with a soccer perspective. This is Soccer Today with Duane, Rollins and Kevin Laramee. Live on the Sports Podcasting Network.
Good day, good night. Welcome to Soccer Today for Monday, April 16th, but lousy March weather.
I was about to say, Kevin, I think you said February wrong.
I know. Smart. It's terrible.
If anyone out there is, a lot of people like to have stereotypes about Canadian weather. This is not normal. For those that don't know, we got hit by a winter storm over the weekend. It is slushy and icy and a bloody mess out there right now. Good welcome for Chivas Mexico, as I like to call them, Chivas Guadalajara, as they arrive in Canada now and must just be shaking their head and counting the moments down until they can get back to Mexico. Joining us on the line, Rudi Schuller from the Sporting News. Rudi, how you doing?
I'm not too bad. Just thawing out, just walking the door, shedding layers right now and trying to get dry.
I guess we might as well continue along the weather path here on the Weather Network. Is this an advantage for TFC, this weather, do you think?
Right now, if the weather stays exactly the same, I wouldn't say it's an advantage for them. I mean, maybe slightly so, because you really can't play soccer in this. I know that Tuesday night it should be a little bit more clear, and the weather, the temperature's supposed to warm up, so a lot of this would melt it off. But it's not snow. It's basically snow on top of 5 centimeters of ice, which is now turned into slush. You can't really play soccer in this. So I think it's reached past the point now where it's an advantage, and I think it's kind of a hindrance to both teams. Hopefully it clears up, and if it gets slightly better, then I'd say it's an advantage. But I don't think TFC is going to be banking too much on the weather to help them out. I think they're going to be looking more at soccer issues rather than try to play the weather too much to their advantage.
Fair enough. And a lot of people are painting TFC as the favorite, and certainly if you look at the results of the semifinal, where TFC got an historic result down in Mexico. Although had they held off on that goal, we wouldn't be worried about the weather right now, because apparently the final would have been flipped around. I don't ever quite understand how CONCACAF does anything, so let's just leave that alone. But are they the favorites? We'll just ask you that bluntly.
Yeah, they should be. And they are. I guess I shouldn't sit that much on the fence. They are. They are the favorites. Of course, there are always caveats. Depends on what kind of lineup they have, how healthy they can be. But if TFC can get anywhere close to their starting 11 out on the field, and then they are the favorites. It's if you look at Chivas' form, not only in the CONCACAF Champions League but also in Mexico, there's no reason to believe that TFC shouldn't be favored in this series. Chivas has not played inspiring soccer at all, and I cynically look at the changes that Liga MX made not too long ago to the promotion and relegation scheme, where they basically announced that they're not going to have relegation for the next 2 years, as trying to save Chivas from dropping down, because that would be absolutely disastrous. They are the biggest team in Mexico, slightly bigger than Club America. They have, maybe not within Mexico, but outside of Mexico, they are certainly bigger. In the U.S., they have more fans. That is, of course, is their biggest secondary market. So it would be an absolute disaster if they were to drop down to Liga Ascenso, which is the second division in Mexico. And the timing of that announcement, it's very suspicious given where Chivas are. I think they're in 15th place, and they're hovering down the bottom places there in Liga MX. So this is a team that is not playing inspiring soccer. We saw that against the Red Bulls. We even saw it, against Seattle a little bit, where Seattle should have probably, scored a few goals on them in Seattle. But the Red Bulls absolutely should have dominated them. But, that's so Metro, hashtag that's so Metro, didn't pull it off. And it should have been, by all rights and by all soccer kind of conventions, it should have been an all MLS final. But Chivas got through it. They're a big club. They have won this tournament before, whereas TFC obviously this is the first time they've been this far in the tournament. So history is on Chivas' side. But talent-wise, I honestly don't think it's a contest. But of course, we know that talent isn't the only thing that decides these games.
Rudi, there was a throwaway game Saturday versus Colorado, and you had a lot of substitutions, a lot of change for Toronto on the pitch. Basically, a USL team slash reserve slash players that don't get a chance to play had a chance to play. Now, tomorrow night, BMO Field, the first leg. Do you expect a regular lineup? More okay? Will he be back in your opinion, or is it maybe still a bit too soon?
Yeah, I mean that's the I don't know how many $1 million question. It's not just Morrow. It's a whole slew of these guys. It's Victor Vasquez. It's Chris Mavinga. It's Gregory Vanderbilt. We're not even completely sure why he was taken off. I've heard that it was a little bit of an Achilles problem, and it's not too bad, but who knows? And then, of course, there's Josie Altidore. So all these guys are question marks, and I'm sure TFC knows a lot more than they're letting on. That's just part of the gamesmanship heading to a final. But you can't deny that they all missed a lot of time, and these are big parts of why TFC is even in this position to begin with. So I'm sure Greg Vanny is praying to whatever God he prays to, and getting all those ducks in a row and hoping that everything works out okay on Tuesday, because it could be a big hole that they have to dig themselves out of from the opening kick, just having a lot of these experienced guys out. To specifically talk about Morrow, he sat on the bench, I believe it was the last game, not the Colorado game, but the last CCL game. He's close. He's been close for a couple of weeks now, but they're being extremely careful with him because, like it or not, they still have a lot of season left after this CCL final, so they have to kind of think long term as well as short term. Out of all of those guys that I mentioned, I think Victor Vasquez is the one that's furthest away. He's got a nerve issue, and it's one of those things that, it either goes away or it doesn't. It's not something that you can kind of massage along and work on. It's something that only time can really heal. And, that's the one thing that TFC doesn't really have right now is time ahead of the CCL finals. So I think the other guys, if I were to put money on it, I think all of those other guys would probably either be in the lineup or be in the starting 11. But I don't think I'm brave enough to put money on that. I think that you'll see most of those guys in the starting 11, though.
This being the first leg of a two-legged final, it's always a bit weird, those two-legged finals. I'll just, of course, go back to 2015 with Montreal having first game on the road, second game at home, which is the opposite of Toronto this year. The first game, it feels like a final, but it kind of feels like a semi at the same time because, well, you had another game left, and a Mexican team are known to maybe absorb a bit more than they would in the second leg, second half, which usually they just open the valves and they let it all out. I just remember Club America famously scoring, 4 goals in not a really long time in the second half in Montreal. How likely is this to happen with Chivas, or is Toronto used to this aspect now after beating both Tigres and Club America?
Sorry, I missed that. You cut out a little bit.
I was wondering, Rudi, with Toronto having the first leg at home and second leg on the road, Chivas not necessarily being a team that travels that well, especially if it's going to be cold, and you do have the second leg at home for Chivas, how likely it is for Chivas to keep the score close until they open up everything in the second half of the second game?
Well, they're going to try. I mean, I don't think that's a secret. I think they're going to try. They tried. They did that against the New York Red Bulls. They did it against Seattle. They looked to play better at home than they do on the road. And, that's not rocket science. That's just sports. That's just, especially soccer in this region. I think I read somewhere that, oddly enough, Chivas is actually better on the road over the past few months than they are at home at Estadio Akron, which is very weird, but maybe that plays into it a little bit. Maybe that kind of plays into their mentality of maybe we need to score an away goal or two before we play at home in front of fans that can, quite honestly, can turn on them at an instant if they're not playing well against the so-called small MLS side, if TFC dominates in the away leg. So it's one of those things, there's so many variables heading into this. And like you said, a two-legged final is just a completely different monster than a regular Champions League one-legged final. And that is another variable. It's the fact that you're playing one half basically in one city and then one half in another. I do think that traditionally that Chivas would look to defend on the road, and I think that's the way they're going to go. They're going to look to obviously get an away goal because that does wonders for them if they can do that. But I don't know if they have the personnel to do that. They're also banged up as well. But even when they're fully healthy, they're not the Chivas of even 2 years ago that won this competition. So you're going to see a very, very defensive performance, akin to what we saw at Red Bull Arena last week. Hopefully for Chivas' sake, they're not going to be giving up 20 some odd shots because TFC is a lot more potent in front of the goal than the Red Bulls are. So I'm really curious to see how the first 15 minutes are going because I think that sets the tone for the entire series.
All right, Rudi, I want to cast our view back a little bit now. And this is a bit of a weird question because obviously they don't give out MVPs of tournaments after the semifinals. But from a TFC perspective, I'm curious who your most valuable player for TFC would be if you had to pick it right now. I have a couple names in mind, but I'm curious what yours would be.
Yeah, there's quite a few actually, but Michael Bradley is the top of that list. It's funny to call him an unsung hero because he's one of the highest paid players on the team. He's the captain. He's one of the most visible guys out there, if not the most visible outside of, obviously the Jovinko and Altidore, the guys who score the goals are visible, but he's the guy that the press always talks to. And he's the guy that's obviously the on-field leader and the off-field leader. So it's kind of funny to say that, but he has been an unsung hero in this tournament. He has played the best soccer that he has played for TFC, and maybe even his entire career over the course of this CONCACAF Champions League run. If I were to go second, third, and fourth, pick and choose. Jonathan Osorio obviously is up there. Sebastian Jovinko has been playing excellently, even though he hasn't been scoring goals at the rate that we're used to. He's been much more of a playmaker, especially in the absence of Victor Vasquez, who's been dealing with that nerve issue. And of course, Josie Altidore, who scores big goals in massive times. There's just so many guys that have put together good performances in this tournament that I think that there's a lot of MVPs, but I think clear cut for me is Michael Bradley.
Fair enough. All right. I'd hate to go into the pesky league issue, but they're 1-3 right now, and no one's going to blame the result on the weekend because obviously Greg Vanney did what he had to do, and that group of guys out there, reminded me of the battle days a little bit. There wasn't a lot of offensive thrust there. How much trouble are they in if they stare down 1-4, or do you think this is a team that can just really literally flip a switch and turn that around in the summer months?
I'm going to go with the latter, and I don't even think they need to flip a switch. I think they're going to play the same way they played in the CCL. Obviously, not with the same intensity over the last 30 games, but they're going to play the same way they always have been playing for the past year and a half, 2 years now. And that's good enough to make it to the playoffs. And let's be honest here, MLS is very forgiving in that way. We all see what Seattle has done over the past 2 years, where they've been horrible over the course of the first 3 months, and then literally flips a switch and got it all the way to MLS Cup final, winning one of those two. So TFC knows that. They know how forgiving MLS can be, and they know how they stack up with the rest of the league. I think that the Supporters Shield may already be out of contention. I think NYCFC and Atlanta and Sporting KC, those are the three teams that are going to be slugging it out. I think KC actually has a little bit of an advantage being in the West. But other than that, they just have to get into the playoffs. And I don't see why TFC can't finish third, to be quite honest. Just looking at the rest of the East and knowing exactly what TFC has to do, I don't see why they can't get into third place. And even if they don't, they know how to win in the playoffs. They've been doing it for a couple of years now. They've been showing it in the CONCACAF Champions League as well. And I think that's it. They literally have nothing to prove anymore in the league. This version of TFC anyway. They don't have anything to prove in the league in terms of Supporters Shield standings, in terms of points accumulated and that kind of stuff. I think the big thing that matters to them at the end is making it back to MLS Cup final, and they have a lot of time to figure that out.
Go ahead, Duane.
All right, quickly, Rudi, do they squad rotate in the MLS Cup final for the Club World Cup, though?
Yeah, you're really going on a limb here, aren't you? We'll talk about that in December. But
okay.
Short answer, I would say no.
Okay.
Now, you mentioned the name a bit earlier, Rudi. Jonathan Osorio. He was instrumental in the victory at Azteca. And what I am surprised is he is not even surprised now by the moments. He comes to the bright lights and he performs. He's not even a surprise figure in the starting 11. he has come a long way since his trouble of 2016. How do you value the importance of Jonathan Osorio for TFC?
Oh man, he's been huge. I mean, you see it in the CONCACAF Champions League. He's I think he's a co-leading scorer of the tournament alongside Sebastian Jovinko and a couple others. That's the impact he's had, and it's not just his goals, because he's not primarily a goal scorer. He's not there, he's not there to provide goals. But if he scores them, they're great. They're kind of a cherry on top. But he's the guy that solidified the midfield, and anyone who knows Jonathan Osorio, talked to him over the years, knows that he doesn't really shrink away from a challenge when it comes to his playing time. I personally spoke to him at the beginning of last year, and to say he had a chip on his shoulder about Victor Vasquez coming in and quote, I'm doing air quotes here, taking his spot, that's an understatement. He was clearly not happy about it. He understood the reasoning, but he kind of said that the team is always looking to replace him, which of course he understands because that's professional sports, but he wasn't going to take it sitting down. And I think that once he got over the kind of emotional aspect of that and looked at it as a professional, he took it as a challenge, and he worked his way back into the lineup. And of course he didn't supplant Victor Vasquez because he doesn't have that skill set, but he grew his own skill set to the point where he became invaluable for Greg Vanney and became a starter in another position. So it's been incredible to watch his transformation as a player and his evolution. And he's even said it himself. He's a lot more mature now, both physically and emotionally. He's put on some weight in the gym, and he's kind of gotten over his kind of emotional aspect that I mentioned there. That chip on his shoulder. He still carries it, of course, but he uses it in a positive way, and we've seen the results on the field. And he's such a smart player to begin with that he's been able to kind of focus all that in being a better player both for himself and for the team. And with Victor Vasquez out now, he's played a little bit more of a offensive role, and we've seen what he can do in that aspect. But I think the fact that he was able to add a lot more defensive aspect to his game is why he's on the field, and he's become a dominant midfielder in MLS terms and now in CONCACAF terms in a very short amount of time. I've always thought highly of Jonathan Osorio and his skills and his potential. But I think he's even surprising someone like me who always thought highly of him, and just how high he's pushed the bar, because he's become one of TFC's best players, and looking at the national team as well, one of the best players in the pool for the Canadian national team. So the fact that he's able to do this in huge stages, on huge stage as the CONCACAF Champions League against massive clubs like Tigres and Club America in Mexico, and of course Abimo as well. That bodes well for him, both for his himself and for TFC, and thirdly for the Canadian national team. So I think that's just a wonderful thing to see.
And just to continue on Osorio for a second, Rudi, one thing that really intrigues me, and I think it shows the dedication that Jonathan Osorio has for the city itself, being from the region of Toronto and seeing TFC as a kid growing up and fan of soccer, this is what he was seeing on TV when he was a kid. And we've seen the Alphonso Davies, which I don't know if there's a pool out there, but there probably is, with the date and the time where Alphonso will leave for Europe. Baloo had the same thing. It's a ticking clock. When you have a young prospect growing up through your academy and having the eyes of the rest of the world of football looking at his development and his progress, it's the question of time before he leaves. When we're looking at Jonathan Osorio, this was never the case. It always felt like Jonathan Osorio was where he thinks he should be in his career development, and I think it's a congratulations to Toronto for keeping him and for developing him the way he is now. But I think there's something to say about him wanting to stay there and Toronto wanting to keep him, and not necessarily having eyes of FC Barcelona B trying to snatch him up.
Yeah, I mean, I think it kind of speaks to the importance of having strong domestic clubs, right? And I think that as Canada gets more of those, knock on wood, then we'll see more of Jonathan Osorio type stories where, he actually did it in reverse. He went to Uruguay as a youngster. He was actually spotted in a tournament here, playing at Lamport Stadium, which is just a few hundred meters from BMO, playing in a youth tournament alongside Lucas Cavallini. And the two of them, alongside another young player, whose name escapes me right now, they were recruited by Club Nacional in Uruguay as teenagers, and they all went down there and honed their craft for a little bit. Of course, Lucas Cavallini stayed down there, and then now he's in Puebla, lighting it up in Liga MX.
Yeah, he scored yesterday.
Jonathan Osorio, sorry?
He scored yesterday, so.
Yeah, he scored, I think, twice.
Or two yesterday.
Two, exactly.
Yeah, twice. Yeah, he was lighting it up. He stayed down there. He got a family, he did all that stuff. But Osorio, once he was too old to be in the youth levels, he came back and he fought his way into a TFC team that was quite awful at the time. And I think that also helped him, is the fact that it wasn't, they weren't TFC now. They were a team that was desperate for talent and desperate for homegrown talent. I'm using the homegrown in the actual term, not the MLS term right now. And it was kind of a catching like lightning in a bottle for this youngster who needed a team, and a team who needed a youngster. They needed each other. So and they stuck with it. And Ashton Morgan's kind of the same, but not on the same scale. But my overall point is that it speaks to the importance of having strong domestic clubs within Canada. And with the CPL coming, I'm hoping to see more of these stories where players, if they don't make it by 20, make it by 20 in Europe and whatnot, they still have a place to develop at home and maybe become into the next Jonathan Osorio or Russell Tybert, whoever or whatever the case may be, because Canada needs those types of players as well as the guys who have aspirations for Europe.
Jonathan Osorio was the only thing to keep TFC fans sane in 2013. He was the leading scorer. Yeah. All right, Rudi, I want to change gears real quick just to end it with this one. News out this morning that South Africa is backing Morocco in the World Cup 2026 bid. That's a bit of a disappointment because there was some thought that South Africa and the allies sort of in Southern Africa there might sort of split off and support the United bid. There was some suggestion of that. That is not happening now, at least publicly. How much trouble, if any, do you think the United bid is in to beat Morocco in this thing?
Oh, they're in some trouble. They're in some trouble for sure. It's not a slam dunk the way it was a year ago. If you had asked me a year ago what were the chances of the United bid pulling this off, I'd say 99.9999, and I keep saying 9%. Now, is it 50-50? I don't even know. Of course, we know what the political climate in the U.S. is like, and I don't think anyone's naive enough to think that that is not having an impact on this whole thing. The loudmouth to the south. And of course, there are other factors too. It's so crazy to think that technically this should be a slam dunk, but the politics of FIFA being what they are, and everything that's going on in the world right now, it's a very big possibility that in June we're going to see the word Morocco come out of that little envelope, and it'll be another case of navel gazing for the following 6 months. What did we do wrong? You're going to see all those think pieces right now. What should the U.S. have done differently? Because of course everyone talks about the U.S. and doesn't talk about Canada and Mexico. And I think that if the worst case scenario happens and Morocco does get it, and I'm thinking worst case scenario from a Canadian perspective, of course, then one of the things that the U.S. should have done is probably played a little bit more equally with Canada and Mexico, and not been the face of the bid as they are. And of course they've learned that since they've changed us. They dropped Sunil Gulati and had the 3 federation presidents take over that role. But also, maybe from the outset, instead of giving each other country 10 games, maybe give them 20 games. Of course, the U.S. should have the lion's share of the game just because they can hold it. But if you want to have a so-called united bid, it has to be a little bit more united. And I think that a lot of these FIFA delegates and these federation delegates are seeing through the fact that this is not a united bid. This is a U.S. bid. And the reason that the U.S. got into bed with Canada and Mexico in the first place is that they knew that the political climate was not on their side. So it was kind of paying lip service to them. So to the fact that this is a united bid. So it's crazy to me to think that they could have screwed the pooch this much. I know a lot of it is out of their hands. Like I said, the loudmouth to the south did done a lot of harm, and of course, what the Department of Justice did to FIFA also did a lot of harm. I'm not naive enough to not think that had an effect as well. But I think that they took a surefire thing and somehow screwed it up. And we're at the point now where you can literally flip a coin between the United bid and Morocco, and that to me is just insane.
Yeah, just the soft count. I've been tracking on my Twitter feed, the pin T there. The soft count meaning the declared plus what we assume. So like Africa for Morocco, the CONCACAF for United. Although we've seen a couple of detractions from there already. But the soft count is 62-50 right now for Morocco. So 104 to win the thing. There's where it stands. All right, Rudy. We'll see you at the stadium tomorrow. If we don't all get iced in. Other than that, we'll talk soon.
Yeah, anytime, guys. Thanks for having me.
You are listening to Soccer Today. Follow us on Twitter at SoccerTodaySPN and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Sports Podcasting Network. You can find the podcast version of all the shows we do on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Google Play Store, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, and anywhere you get your podcast.
If you are listening to us live, thank you very much. If you are listening on podcast, thank you as well. The video feed, you can look at the small red box right over here. Subscribe and make sure you click on that little bell to the right of the button to make sure you're notified whenever we go live on YouTube. Duane, I have to say, campione, ole, ole, ole.
One job, United. They could. United so bitter that City had to win the title that they couldn't even let City do it on the pitch. I was watching Homeland on Netflix when I got the alert. Oh, okay. So they lost to West Brom. We won the title. There you go. Not quite the same as say 2012. I wasn't pounding a table with my fist as a German man was on my back for some reason. Don't ask that question. I'm still not sure how that happened.
Don't know why, but it happened. Just be glad.
Yeah, it's not quite like that. Not even quite like 2014 when there was sort of that roller coaster ride down the end. Steven Gerrard falling on his
the slip.
Chelsea coughing it up the next week, and then somehow the title's in front of us. And so this was a little different, but this is more of from a City perspective, I think more of a celebration of a season rather than a moment. Obviously, the intensity has been out of this season for a while. I think obviously when they lost the Champions League to Liverpool, that was the end, the last sort of intensity it was. And there won't be another moment of anxiety this year. They're playing, really going to play out the string. They're 105, they want to get the record, 95 points. So that's, I think, a goal. But that doesn't have the same intensity as winning a title. I'd like to see them roll out a few of the kids. I'd like to see them, so they have a great academy, but those guys never seem to get a breakthrough. So hopefully maybe we'll see stuff like that. But when you look back at this season from a Manchester City perspective, regardless of how the title happened in the very end, how it was clinched, it has to be something that, 2 trophies, champions, you got to celebrate this. Obviously, there's still work to do for them to get to the standards that they want to put forth, especially in Europe. Although, I don't know, the European thing, it was 30 minutes of madness, killed them, and that's how fine the line is at the end. That's disappointing, but I don't know whether there's much you could do other than not have 30 minutes of madness, right? Like, there's a bit of bad luck, and sometimes in knockout, in playoff situations, people don't like to talk about the luck factor, but the luck factor can roll in. Liverpool has their number. They have to figure that one out, but start to build towards next season and improve it even more, I think, at this point in time. And are they the favorite to win the title again next year? It's hard to look at a champion and not say they aren't. We said the same thing about Chelsea last year, but we'll see.
Chelsea had Europe this year, and next year at least they won't have Champions League, probably. So we'll see. Maybe Chelsea
will have Europa. What they want to do with that's up to them.
Well, last time they were in the Europa League, they won it. So I don't have any, and that's before. Well, back then they did get the Champions League spot too, and they were the first team to do so. So maybe they find their way to the Champions League by winning Europa League next year, or maybe just outright by finishing top 4. We'll see. But that's enough Chelsea talk. It's about City today, or maybe about how United just lost at home to West Brom. It's like, The title wasn't won there. You're right. The title it was won in the entirety of the season so far by City, but a good comeback by Manchester United. I have been impressed. Yes, they haven't been able to finish the job late, But I have to say, United did perform a lot better than expectations at the beginning of the season. But for a City team that never really was in trouble in the entire season, they were able to, amidst injury, amidst, I wouldn't say controversy at all, but amidst like difficulties in Europe and having difficult games, and you have the bus situation last week, and it still was a very, what seemed to be not an easy title, but I've seen a lot more difficult achievements.
Well, they won top. They ran the table, right? They didn't run the table in terms of not losing. Obviously, they lost twice and 3 draws, but they've never trailed. Well, I guess that's a lie. They were a little bit behind in the early weeks, but after they pulled ahead, I believe it was in August when they took over first. They haven't looked back. Currently, 87 points. They're 16 points up, plus 68 on the goal differential. 93 goals scored. This has been a remarkable season across the board for them. I do think that with 5 games to play, 15 points up for grabs, they're probably looking at 15 points. If they can run that out, they're going to get 100 points first time ever. They certainly should be able to get the 95 to break the record there. That's got to be the goal there. There's still stuff to play for in this table this season out, although, truth be told, if you're really interested in some competitive football to finish out your European season, maybe you don't have to free advertise for them, maybe pick up a DAZN free month and watch the championship out, because that's where a lot of stuff's going on. And we should probably mention that Wolves was promoted yesterday as well over the weekend. Same way they went through on another team's loss.
Yeah, and the funny thing is Wolves before the beginning of the season had a great team building moment. They decided to play Football Manager, Duane, as their own team, and in Football Manager in their game they won the championship and they got promoted. And guess what? Sometimes fiction does come really, really close to reality. Wolves won the championship and they're getting promoted.
Yeah, real quickly, for those that haven't been following, as I said, there's a stretch run in the playoffs. I do recommend it. There's not a lot left going on in the Premier League. Even the relegation race isn't that exciting, really. Wolves is promoted. They're Cardiff and Fulham are a great battle for that automatic promotion spot, only a point off there. Then you go down to Villa, 79 points in a playoff spot, looking pretty solid to get at least a playoff spot there. Middlesbrough at 69, Millwall at 69, right now holding down that final playoff spot. Derby County at 68, Preston North End at 66, Sheffield United at 66, Brentford at 65, Bristol City at 65, and those are the 11 teams there that are probably still in the mix. Well, 10 teams I just listed because Wolves are through to get promotion yet. So a lot to play for in the championship. So there is still a lot of good football to watch in the remainder of this spring that doesn't look like spring outside right now.
This March weather. We'll be right back with our weekend in review and our Canadian review.
You are listening to Soccer Today. Follow us on Twitter at SoccerTodaySPN and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Sports Podcasting Network.
Patreon.com/Sports Podcasting Network is where you can get your exclusive The Two Solitude Soccer Podcast for patrons only, talking about the Canadian Premier League, Canadian soccer only. And this week on Thursday, when the show comes out, we will be talking about the rumored and leaked name for Teams and Patent that has been filed by the CanPL last week, and a few of those stories this Thursday for patrons only. $2 a month, $1 of Solitude gives you access to this wonderful show, and we really enjoy your support since the beginning of this venture, and we would love it for continue. So patreon.com/sports Podcasting Network. Duane, the Boule de Bois. What is your Boule de Bois for the weekend?
The Vancouver Whitecaps.
I can't predict anything. They win, and then I don't. Yeah, it's like wow. Yeah, at home.
We'll talk a little bit more when we get into the Canadian review, but they were dreadful on Friday. Like that was just horrific to watch. I mean, give a little credit, I guess, to LAFC, but Kevin, my God, that was just not a good performance by the Whitecaps, and their fans were having them tell. There's some Rob out hashtags going around there. A lot of people don't like the stylistically how they always seem to be predictable, just kind of bypass the middle, get the ball up into the box when Kamara not in the lineup. They didn't seem like they had any ideas, and just not a good performance overall.
Yeah, where there's a theory that we've been talking about a few years. If you've been listening to me on my friend shows and Two Salted Soccer podcast for a few years, Duane, the replicability, being able to replicate situations as a goal scorer. So how a goal is scored, is it because of a bounce here and there, and then he gets an opportunity and he scores, which is very, very low probability of replicating the same goal? Or when you have a goal that is dictated by the pace of the players, the passing game, and finding breakthroughs and getting a lane open, making that pass, and then he's alone with the keeper and he shoots and he scores, this is very replicable. And when we're looking at the breakthroughs of the Vancouver Whitecaps that has come to success over the last 3 years, have been more in the non-replicable aspects of opportunities and chances than the replicable ones, which were, when you have a replicable opportunity, a scoring chance, means you have a higher probability of doing it more and more, again and again, and creating more chances. And that's why often when we look at soccer, we don't just look at the actual goals, but we look at the goals that are forgetting the exact term, which really look like a fool right now. It's the expected goals that we're looking at, which is the amount of chance of scores going into the game that usually would, in out of times of 100, would score majority of the time. So those are the expected goals versus the goals is a very important statistics. And when I look at Vancouver over the last 3 years, you have a lot more goals that are coming off bounces, a guy getting a clear opportunity because of a mistake, but not replicable goals.
No, look, yeah, and nothing was replicable about the game on Friday, as I said, but certainly they're predictable stylistically, and they do. I mean, they're set up to succeed at home, right? That turf is very fast. You know, I'm a well-known critic of the turf at BC Place. I do not care for it at all. I think it makes for ugly football, but nonetheless, they are set up to take advantage of that, to be fast and to be direct and to do all those sort of things. And Kamara, Kai Kamara is a very good system, very good fit for that system. But as I said, with him out of the lineup, they didn't look like they had a lot of ideas. They almost, like, I don't know why they're not starting Shea if he's out, because once they put, there's score effects happening at this point, but once they put Shea in, they started to create some chances at the end there, and I wonder whether it might not have made sense if you're going to play that direct and put that big body up front. And does Brek Shea even have a position anymore? It's hard to figure out what the hell he plays. But anyway, it was just, wow. Like, it was one of the worst games I've ever seen them play. And I don't know how much of that was LAFC, to be honest. I didn't think LAFC was that spectacular. I'm going to mention one of the players here in a minute when I get into the later medals. But yeah, it was just abject. It was not a good performance, and the goalkeeping was terrible. That second goal was a cluster of what. Just a poor performance by the Whitecaps, and they continue to be very difficult to peg.
All right, my boule de bois, Duane. My boule de bois is Columbus, and this was a weird situation. And if you haven't seen, DC United on Saturday played Columbus. They did not play at RFK, of course, because going to be blown up, and their stadium is not ready yet. So they're played at the Navy Stadium, close to DC, and which is where the weird environment for soccer. And it was a very, very. It felt like a D3 game. It didn't feel like an MLS game at all. Just looking at the ticket stubs, and it really felt like a USL game. But DC United Columbus on that pitch. DC United early on gets a goal. Their only shot on net is that goal in the first few minutes, and then they get a red card. But they're able to hold on. So my boule de bois goes to Columbus. Columbus, you're supposed to be better. You're supposed to be able to beat ADC in kind of like a neutral stadium. They should have been able, at 11 versus 10 too, to get something out of this game. DC United battling hard for their first win in 2018, down a man in a weird stadium, in a situation that is not a one that anyone was used to. So you don't have your marks, you don't have your routine, is all different, and you get into a stadium that you're not used to. It does not feel familiar. You lost that era of familiarity. So now it's tough to get a result, but they still did. DC United beating maybe the beginning of the struggles for Columbus that we have talked about this season so far, maybe this is the first of that downward spiral.
Fair enough. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to be consistent in MLS. As we said, there were some interesting results this weekend for sure, and Columbus being one of them. And that was not one I would have expected. That's why MLS can be a very difficult league to bet on. Although there's a lot of good value in MLS if you do like to throw some money around here and there. You just have to get a little lucky. All right, Kevin, I'm going to move to my bronze. I'm going to give it collectively to the bounce back of the Red Bulls after a very disappointing midweek result, obviously, against Chivas. To go out of that competition there and to be able to emotionally recover in time to get the win over the Impact. Impact a little flat, I thought. We'll probably talk about them a little bit more in a minute, but certainly full measure for the Red Bulls on the day. And they could have easily, no one would have really been that angry at them, that confused by them had they sort of, sulked through that game, because it's very difficult to be eliminated in a competition that you were clearly putting a lot into and then immediately turn around and play a game on the weekend as they had to do quickly, because it was the first game off the hop too. So good for the Red Bulls to get the result that they did based on the disappointment that they went through earlier in the week.
Yeah, no, absolutely, full measure for that. And yeah, you're right. We'll talk about it in the Canadian review, but the absence of Saphir Titer and the subpar play of a few players on Saturday for Montreal really cost them this game, and it's unfortunate. Montreal 2 wins, 3 losses, which is 2 wins, 4 losses now, but they were all like in bunches, 2-2-2. All right, going to my boule de bronze, Duane, and my boule de bronze goes to Kansas City, Seattle. Kansas City able to get a point still in a game that wasn't necessarily as easy as anticipated yesterday. Kansas City, one of the now favorites for the Supporters' Shield, were able, and yes, Sunday was a game of 2 for 2. Kansas City, Seattle 2-2, Atlanta, NYCFC 2-2, and both games gets my boule de bronze, Duane, because of the way they battled back. Atlanta making sure that they're still in the conversation and not dropping points to their probable rival for the Eastern Conference, at least, with the 2-2 draw with NYCFC coming in late for Atlanta. And, if I had a secondary boule de bois, I will give it to one of the fans in Atlanta that yelled at Josef Martinez in the tunnel, and Martinez getting all amped up, turning around, yelling at the fan right next to the barricade and wanting to get into it. It took 3 Atlanta players to restrain him. I don't know what it is with tunnels in MLS or in CONCACAF recently. Well, I guess we need to put permanent cameras in the tunnels because a lot of things happen in tunnels.
I'm seriously thinking of going down at halftime to watch. Like, there's this year, I can just go where I am in the press box. I can walk straight down the stairs and watch them walk in if I want. And hell, at this point in time, I might have to if this stuff keeps happening at the Tunnel Club in Toronto. But yeah, certainly not the first time we've heard this stuff. Sometimes stuff happens. So I guess there's 2 brawls in baseball last week too. So maybe just the world's just angry right now.
But those are the worst brawls ever. Like baseball brawls, like you look at a guy not correctly, the 2 benches clears, and then they're looking at each other like, what? Nah.
It's like in high school or when you're in sports growing up and everyone sort of grabs off and you're like, please don't throw a punch because I really don't want to fight. Is kind of what that's about.
Yeah, I know exactly. All right, moving on to your boule de silver.
I'm going to give it to Diego Rossi and with a little bit of a nod to Mark Anthony Kaye and LAFC. Mark Anthony Kaye, quickly on that, he's my honorary there. He's just had such a solid season, and it's really just nice to see. But Rossi is becoming our true must-watch guy in this league. He's just so creative on the ball, and he makes a lot of what LAFC is having success with is going through just his, they're having to pay attention to him and his ability to create. And wasn't, vintage. There weren't a lot of highlights out of that, but just consistently watching that game, he was just, every time he was on the ball, you'd look at him and go, yeah, this is a guy that you can understand why he's in as a DP, and you can understand why Bob Bradley wanted to build his efforts around him.
Yeah, no, it's a very good choice. Moving on quickly to my boule de silver, boule d'argent, and mine, Duane, is the debut of Darwin Quintero. Did not necessarily go as planned for Minnesota. They lost on the road 3-2 to Portland. Portland at home, and finally they look good for one of the first time of the season. But for Minnesota, they scored twice. Yes, the goal at the 81st minute was an own goal, but Quintero could have scored maybe 3-4 goals in this game if he would have been a bit more patient, realist, and not necessarily want to show off as much. Like, why try a bicycle when you have like 5 yards of space and just control the ball and shoot on net? Those little moments that could have gone even better for Quintero, but you definitely saw in his debut what makes him the first DP in Minnesota history, what makes him a good addition to the league with that type of flair and attitude. And I've talked about last week how he's a bit of a jokester, a bit of a prankster outside of the pitch. He is kind of like at a pitch on bit. So I'm not saying reel him in. I'm saying just damper it a bit. Like, instead of trying that bicycle, maybe trying to be the most efficient shot on net, because the net was all open and it would have been 3-3 if that goal would have gone in. But that's what I'm talking about. It's fun to see that flair and that confidence in those moments of agility shown by Quintero.
Fair enough, yeah. And look, Minnesota's been one of the surprises of the season so far. Not, it surprises in the sense that we thought they might be wooden spoon contenders, and it seems like they might be in that sort of I hesitate to call it battle royale. It's more of a crabs in a bucket kind of situation where what's happening for that sixth spot in the West. But
no, you stay here. No, you come back here. No, don't go up. Don't get out of the bucket. You come back down.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, but they certainly seem like they might be in the mix. All right, Kevin.
Ballon d'Or.
I'm gonna give my gold d'Or to Dom Dwyer again. This is 2 weeks in a row. Dom Dwyer, I don't know if there's ever been. He had a big goal, obviously. They broke open that game, and Philly looked crap after that. But I don't quite know if there's ever been a player in Major League Soccer history that's more fit the team that he's on than Dom Dwyer and the Orlando Lions. There, they just seem to mesh together, and there's something. Like, I find Orlando a little villainous anyway. Something about the way that they contain themselves, something about the way that the fans get so defensive whenever you criticize them. There's something about them, and Dom Dwyer he has that feel. He just seems like Orlando, and certainly he's scoring when he wants right now. He's got a hot foot, only the one goal in the game, but certainly instrumental in breaking that open.
Like, he literally played with that youngest defense, the youngest backline in the history of Major League Soccer for Philadelphia. And yes, it has become a trope already. But when we're looking at how Dom Dwyer, in that first goal, just broke open that run, knew exactly that the pass was going to go there. He knew when to time the run to be behind the defender before the offside call. And as soon as the Philly defender realized it, it was already too late and it was 5 yards behind. And guess what? It's 1-0 Orlando. So no, I have to agree, and I go in the same direction. My Ballon d'Or and my vote for Player of the Week for week number, 7 now? Week 6? Week 7?
God, yeah. I'd have to go see what our email says.
Yeah, that's what I'm doing right now. So I'm like talking here, just checking. For week 7, my vote is Dominic Dwyer.
There you go. Yeah, it is. There hasn't been a great blowout performance in the last couple of weeks. So I gave Dwyer was my second pick last week. I had Molina was the player that ended up being the player of the week was my pick. But yeah, it's been a strange sort of, we're getting into the excitement of the start's done right now. So you're getting into that grind of okay, we're not quite firing on all cylinders yet, but we're not, really excited anymore. So it sort of works out like that. I forget the name. What was the kid's name that got pulled on the offside that played Dwyer on in that? He had a one howler of a game. If there was a goat of the week, it would be that.
That's what his name. Here, you continue talking and I'll figure it out.
Yeah, it was just dreadful. Philadelphia did not look good, and that crowd. There's something sad going on there. Maybe we should talk to Jonathan or someone else that's associated with Philadelphia just to sort of talk about that, because that's a market that's really struggling right now. And, it reminds me a little bit of Toronto, basically in the 2012-2013 years where they had such a great start off the pitch, and Sons of Ben were such a story, and they were always packed. But now you look at the Chester games and you can read the Philadelphia on the stands, and no one seems to be out there. They're booing the team off the pitch. I did the record at the end of that. Jim Curtin's points percentage, so the amount of percentage points available that he's got is something like 30. Well, it is. It's 38% since he started.
Ooh.
So it's a 1.14 points per game average that he's had as head coach. So it's it's not going well in Philadelphia, and they're really, with the success of the Eagles and there's other teams. The 76ers are doing very well right now too. They're in danger of becoming completely irrelevant in that market, and I don't know what to do. It's not looking pretty right now, though.
Yeah, it was Jack Elliott and Austin Trusty were the two center back versus Orlando on Friday, and Jack Elliott, I believe, is the culprit on the play that we were talking about.
Yeah, it was not a good performance.
Well, he got subbed off at the 52nd minute, so that tells you all you need to know.
Play your kids, yes, but don't throw your kids to the dogs, right, or the wolves.
The Wolves. Yeah. Exactly. All right.
Yeah.
Now moving on to the Canadian review, and let's go to Saturday morning. Kind of. It was 1 p.m. in the afternoon at Red Bull Arena. Quite a beautiful day at Red Bull Arena. 24 degrees Celsius, nice and sunny. Wasn't the case here, and it wasn't really sunny for the Impact. A goal off the bat by Bradley Wright Phillips. The Impact never really looked back. The absence of Saphir Titer having a red card last week really showed, and the subpar performance by a few players like Samuel Piet, like Nacho Piatti, that did not get the service that he had in the last couple of games. The connection with Titer was really impressive before, but the lack of presence of Titer because of the red card the last two games, you do see it, the repercussions of that, and you do see Nacho Piatti not having the kind of service and ball that he didn't have the last few games. And no Piatti, apparently, no creativity, and no party outside of Jason Vargas. Jason Vargas, what a free kick, beautiful goal by Jason Vargas. Finally, another player than Didier Drogba that can score on direct free kicks for the Montreal Impact. It's the only other player that ever scored for the Montreal Impact since like 2012 off free kick. It was Drogba, and now Vargas. We might have found a suitable replacement on the dead ball, maybe a dead ball specialist finally. But you do have that sense of it's not going to be enough now with injuries or with suspensions and disciplinary aspect. Montreal will need to continue to discover this league and to continue to put on 90-minute performances across the 11 players that are playing at the same time to be able to achieve results. Don't get me wrong, I think the game versus Toronto and the 2 wins in a row that Montreal did have skewed a bit of the expectations for Montreal. Montreal is still going to have to battle to be in the playoff contention, and that's what we have seen on Saturday afternoon.
Yeah, well, the Toronto win, I don't want to take anything away from it because Toronto did put a strong lineup out there, but a lot of factors, right? You're playing at the Big O where you've been training at, so you had the advantage there. Toronto's in the middle of the CCL run. It might have sort of made people think that the rebuild or the reload or whatever you want to call it might have been a little bit more ahead of schedule than it is. I think what you saw on the weekend was just really an indication of the gap of talent between what I think a Red Bulls team that is going to be, in contention to near the top of the East most of the year, perhaps, based on the CCL play, and you combine that, they're right up there with the big four, I think, in the East right now, and Toronto, New York, Atlanta, and the Red Bulls, I think, are your top 4 teams. Columbus in there somewhere as well. I don't quite know what to make of them, but I think it was just a gap situation. And when you have a team like Montreal that, as I said, is trying to refocus, we'll call it, sort of maybe hoping to nick 6th or 5th near the end, you're going to have games like that, especially on the road. And I wouldn't get too worked up with it if I were a Montreal fan. I don't think they are, but certainly a little bit of the gap there. I guess you could sort of blame them for not taking advantage of sort of a tired New York team, but credit, as I said earlier on, to New York as well for
they're good. Like how they get Bradley Wright Phillips to be in the right position at the right time whenever the ball bounces and gets to him. It's like, yeah. And my friend Samba Pete at Samba Pete, Lopierre, if you're listening, mentioned a good comment. And, it's, those what ifs. Yes, it's always hypothetical, and it's really not healthy to think like this. But what if Jesse Marsh had the time to develop his ideas in Montreal? Where Montreal would be today? Yeah, look at New York since Jesse Marsh came. Yep.
Well, all right. I mean, what's the criticism that I've had of Montreal over the years? Is that they don't stay put long enough, right?
I know. Well, look, Greg Vanney is a good parallel to what Jesse Marsh was in his beginning in Montreal, right? Where they both got their head coach job. That was their first big opportunity, and they were in a place where it's not necessarily easy because of recent history for Toronto and a terrible group. Well, when you're looking at Montreal, it was a brand new team expansion. So there's a parallel to be made. And, MLSC stuck with Greg Vanney. Look at Toronto FC. All right, fine. There's $15 million a year. That difference on the pitch. But if you're looking at Jesse Marsch, if his ideas were listened to in 2012, especially in the late 2012 going into 2013, or maybe if there was just a working together aspect and not. Anyways, it's talking about the past, but the what could have been really hit me hard last night.
Yeah, look, this segues into TFC anyway, but there was a good point that Extra Time Radio made about Vanney today. Well, I guess it would have been their Thursday edition when they were talking about the CCL and Toronto's win there. It's very simple, and a lot of people, particularly people that consider themselves fans of teams that are rivals of TFC, like to bang the drum on they just outspend. But the reality is, just saying Toronto outspends to get successful is ignoring the contributions of Zabaleta, of Haglund, of Osario, of Delgado, of players like that are players that any MLS team could get, right? And what they said on Extra Time Radio is that people ignore how much TFC has coached up players in those 3-4 years, have taken guys like Delgado that were borderline players, that were borderline MLS players, really like 18 players, but not starting 11 players. Guys like Osario that were kind of in and out of the lineup, and they've made them into constant starters. And credit goes to the players, obviously, but also they've been coached up, and that's a key component to MLS, and it's a key component to why stability matters so much. I've always believed one of the values of stability for players and coaches is it allows players to play above their station too, in the sense that they're just used to the players around them, so they anticipate what they're going to do, and they know what's happening, and they know the style inside and out. So that allows them to be more successful maybe than their talent level have. So stability is so vital, and to tie it back to Montreal, you're right. They just had a little patience at one point there with Marsch, and I don't know what that thinking was. I think that was just that one of all the decisions that have come down from the front office, and whether how much of that is the owner and how much of that is the ownership group around him, who knows. But
Duane, there's more to that story in late 2012. It was in December 2012 or January 2013. I don't necessarily remember, but there's more to the story. When the guy is fired and then he goes around the world to change his mind and clear his head to make sure that he can come back in the right position, something more happened than we know. There's more to the story than just a disagreement between the two parties, which would be Jesse Marsch and the Montreal Impact for an office. But we're just talking about stories from late 2012, so it's 2018. But yes,
I mean, hindsight's 2020. But
it's easy to see now with 6 years and a different Jesse Marsch, having traveled the world and seen different things, coaching Red Bull. But it was still just an interesting tidbit of information. Now let's move to Toronto. Duane, 2-0 loss to Colorado in Colorado. I mentioned to Rudi earlier in this show how it was a throwaway game. Not necessarily the result of throwaway. There was some positive when you're looking at the play of the young guns and the play of a certain player that don't get a chance to play. They were not necessarily outclassed 100% by Colorado. No one usually is. It's Colorado, I know. But for Toronto, there's still some positive, but the loss doesn't really hit that hard when you're thinking about tomorrow night.
No, I mean, look, if you have a long view, there is some concern there. I mean, they're already falling considerably behind Atlanta and New York in terms of the race for the top of the East. I don't really care about the Shield that much. They proved that they could win the Shield last year. The CCL is more important than the Shield for sure. But what I do think Toronto fans should be a little bit concerned about it is I do think they're set up to finish third right now once they turn this on, unless they would do something crazy outstanding the rest of the way. I mean, that's the only way they get top two, I think, is if they go on a run of, unparalleled in MLS history, maybe lose one or two more games the rest of the way or something. But if they finish third, that means they're going to have to play that play-in game, and anything can happen in a one game. So that might be the one concern that you look at that right now, based on the hole that they've dug a little bit early by focusing on CCL. But as you say, in terms of an isolation, you look at the game on Saturday, no one important got hurt or tired. I think it illustrates how, I love Tosaint Ricketts. Everyone in the city does, but he, at this point in his career, is a 15-minute end-of-game player. When you throw him up top to start, and we saw that even, he wasn't starting, obviously, but when he filled in for Josie, it's just not his game anymore. He can chase the ball and create problems at the end with tired defenses, but he's kind of predictable, and he doesn't have the ability to go as hard as he needs to be successful if he's in there from the beginning. We saw that there. We're still trying to figure out the Ben Spencer experience. Some people are debating what Toronto FC's last bad signing is. It's increasingly becoming Ben Spencer, I think. He didn't really do much, got pulled out there. What I did like about it was that they still had a lot of possession and still were able to work a lot of chances, even though they really had nothing up top to finish it, despite the fact that they were having, the most rotated lineup I've ever seen in TFC history. Like they're who's number 56? That was literally a line that came out where I was watching this game at one point, right? So
yeah,
it's Telford, by the way, but this is guys that like players you looked on the roster, they go, oh yeah, that's they signed 2 players for the game, so they had a bench. This is not something that
you're like, oh yeah, homegrown. They signed 2 homegrown. Like, yeah, they signed 2 homegrowns because they need to right now because they don't want to have those tired legs traveling to Colorado and back and playing at altitude. So you go to Colorado.
And we're going to see the same thing next week in Houston. That's the more of the concern right now, is that it would have been nice to get a draw out of this. And I think that the ideal situation for TFC is that they get a 3-goal lead. I mean, obviously for a lot of reasons, but if they get a 3-goal lead, say, against Chivas and the lack of firepower that Chivas has, I think that you might see less of a rotation in Houston, because they might say, okay, well, we should probably put enough on this to try and at least get a point out of this game. But if it's tight, then we're going to see the same lineup against Houston next week, because the Dynamo refused to move the game. A lot of people criticize them for that. I kind of understand it from their perspective. I mean, they're not under no obligation to, and they've already moved 1 game this year, and there's not a lot of open spots on their lineup. Basically, the only time they could have squeezed it in there would be to shove another game in during the World Cup. And if you're Houston, you struggle to sell tickets in the summer anyway, and you're going to try and sell tickets for a made-up game, in the heat of summer while the World Cup's going on. That's not something that probably they wanted from a business perspective or from a competitive perspective. So I get it, but it's going to create some problems. And if they go 1-4, like, does anyone really think that Toronto won't win 2/3 of the remaining games in MLS once CCL's done? I don't think so. What they're doing against Club America suggests to me that they can probably do the same thing against the DC United, right?
So probably a lot easily too. Like it might be a lot easier against a DC United or I don't know, Philadelphia Union,
right.
Yeah. So no, that's interesting. All right, let's finish the show quickly with Vancouver. We already addressed the situation a bit earlier in our medals or our Ballon d'Ors or our trophies for the weekend, week number 7. Vancouver Whitecaps, Duane, a defeat this weekend at home versus a pretty decent team, but I was kind of disappointed as well by the performance of the Whitecaps, because LAFC, you're talking about an expansion team that got their rear ends handed to them the week before, and they're able to travel and get a 2-0 win on the road in a playing environment that they're not used to. So for Vancouver, like we mentioned, they're tough to handicap, but they're tough to predict, which is a bit of the same. But I'm not sure that this bodes well long term. They can, what they remind me of? They remind me of the Montreal Canadiens of the last few seasons, where they beat the best teams, but they lose to the teams they're supposed to win.
Yeah. Well, only the Canadians have a better goalie than the Whitecaps have right now.
Fair enough.
It was, if we had an NHL show, we could debate whether they should get rid of said goalie, because they don't look like they're going to compete for a cup anytime soon. But that's another story altogether.
It costs too much money, so yeah, I agree. Just trade him and get Crosby, but that's never going to happen.
Neither does Toronto, based on their start of the playoffs so far either. Yeah. Anyway,
go Vegas. Go Vegas, because it's all fixed. Go Vegas.
Or the Capitals. My Capitals are 2 overtimes in a row. Ugh. Anyway, gonna get angry here. Back to the Whitecaps. I don't know how much of that game, Kevin, was LAFC playing well or the Whitecaps playing poorly. I think if you're a Whitecaps fan, you gotta hope that it was the former, because if it was the latter, it was dreadful. And I don't want to batter them too much. I'm trying to think of a positive. I mean, Davies was invisible the whole game. The keeping was ferocious. It just was not a good game, and it's one that you just have to put aside if you're a Whitecaps fan and just move on from. I guess it happens sometimes. it's kind of scary because, as I said, they're set up to be successful at home, but they've got to have a backup plan. Kamara, if he goes out again or if he's out for a long period of time, you got to have a backup plan if you're going to play the style that they are, and they didn't on Friday. And they got another tough one coming up this week too, so they got a little time to figure it out, but not something that would inspire the troops there. And as I said, I'm well known for interacting with Whitecaps fans, and I don't ever remember more Whitecaps fans agreeing with me than another game, if you follow what I'm saying there. Normally they're yelling at me for something, but they were on my side when I was talking about how poorly the Whitecaps were playing on Friday. And I think that there's a lot of tired Whitecaps fans right now that are tired of that team just spinning its wheel. I mean, they've never been bad, they've never been good. They're just kind of spinning their wheels, and it's a hard thing to get excited or crazy about. But a poor result for sure on Friday.
By the way, cheap plug to friends of the podcast, friends of Soccer Today, friends of the network, actually partners of the network. If you're looking for Vancouver Whitecaps coverage, you can find Mark Daly's From the Back Line available at FromTheBackline.com, and anywhere you can get your podcast, you can find this Vancouver Whitecaps podcast. Mark is the co-host as well of Scuderia Formula One, F1 podcast that him and I host, and we'll be back later this week with that, talking about the Chinese Grand Prix. But Duane, to finish the show today, we're going to come back tomorrow, talk about the CCL, of course, but make sure you subscribe to us on YouTube, on iTunes, on wherever you get your podcast, to make sure you never miss a show. And if you are subscribing on YouTube right now, click that red button and click the bell right of the button to make sure you're always notified whenever we are live. You can follow Duane on Twitter at 24th Minute and myself at Kev Laramee at Soccer Today SPN. And as always, until tomorrow, have a great soccer.
You can find the podcast version of all the shows we do on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Google Play Store, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, and anywhere you get your podcast.